Hello and welcome to lesson 3 of week 6. In this lesson, we are going to talk about error handling in Python. My name is Mildred. In Python, we have two types of errors that can occur. We have syntax error and then we have logical error or exception. And syntax error is just an error that occurs in the code. Let's say, for instance, we make a mistake in the code, like an indentation error. That is a syntax error. But for logical error is when the syntax test is passed and then during runtime an error occurs, like a zero division error, for instance, like we try to divide any number by 0. Those are logical errors or exceptions. We are going to illustrate this, or how to handle errors in Python, and then also look how to raise errors when we have a predefined condition. So let's say we want to collect inputs from a user. Let's say this is like an ATM, a snippet of code from an ATM machine, and we want a user to select an amount, and if the amount is greater than the maximum withdrawal for the day, we want to print out a message to the screen, else we want to do something else, and then we want to see how to handle this. So let's create a variable called user input, for instance, and what we'll say this variable is let's say it will say input, please enter an amount. Now whenever this user enters an amount, is going to be entered, or the type of the variable user input is going to be a string, but we want it to be an integer because we want to compare it against a value. And let's say we have a value called maximum is equal to 1000. Now let's say try. What are we trying? We want to say if the user input is greater than the maximum, we want to do something. Let's say print, and we are going to print, please enter a valid amount. Please enter an amount less, not more than, not exceeding 1000. And else we want to say print, and let's say take your cash. Let's just make it short and simple. Okay, then we want to have an except block that handles any error that occurs within. So this is going to be converted to an int first, and so in the except block we want to do something. We want to say that if what is entered is not an integer, we're going to have an error here when trying to compare a string and an integer. So we will use an error we already know will occur, which is the value error, because the value is not the type that we expect. And so we'll accept value error, and we'll say please enter a valid amount as the message to be displayed instead of the cryptic Python errors. Then we can have a finally block that will say something regardless of what happens within the try except block. Now finally is not compulsory, but sometimes you want to print out something regardless of the events of the try and the except block. So we're accepting value error, please enter a valid amount. If we do not know the type of error that is going to happen, we don't need to put the value error here, but we know that it's going to be a value error, and so we'll put it there. And so when I run this, I'll have please enter an amount, and let me enter 1000. 1000 is the maximum. It will go well. Please take your cash. Thank you for banking with us. Now we can see thank you for banking with us is printed out. Now I'm run again, and it will say please enter an amount, and I want to enter something greater than 1000, and to say please enter an amount not exceeding 1000. We have thank you for banking with us, still printed out. Now let me enter a string. Let me just say string, and to tell me please enter a valid amount, thank you for banking with us, what we want in the except block. So regardless of the event, we've always had thank you for banking with us printed. So when we want to have a code that is risky, that can result in an error, we want to wrap the code within a try block, and then the except block will hold what we want to happen when an error occurs. You might want to have your predefined error, you know the error that is going to happen in advance. You can put it here, value error. Let's say as value error, like this, since we know it's a value error, and then we can now say print enter a valid amount. If we are testing, we can say value error as E, and then we're going to print E. We want to see what it prints out. So it will print out a cryptic message that the user will not be able to understand, and that is why we will put custom error messages for the user to understand what to do. And so please enter an amount, we'll say 3000, and then it will say please enter an amount not exceeding 1000, and because we have a large amount, so this statement took place. But when we enter a string now, and I'll enter a string, it will have me invalid literal for int with base 10, because here I have asked it to print out the cryptic normal Python error message. And so most of the time, or all the time, when it's for production, you want to print out a message that the user will understand. Okay, we can raise errors without using this particular method. Let's say, for instance, we want to say instead of printing here, we'll say raise. So we know the predefined condition that is a value error. So we're going to be raising value error, and then in the parentheses of that value error, we want to say please enter an amount not exceeding 1,000, right? Else, please take your cash, and then we want to accept value error, and then we'll say please enter a valid amount here. Thank you for banking with us. So let's say value error. We raise the value error here, and then we accept the value error here. So regardless of what happens, it will print out a message that the user will understand. So let's run this. We enter an amount that is a string. You say please enter a valid amount, like we want it here, the except block. And when I enter a value that is greater than 1,000, it should tell me please enter a valid amount. Please enter a valid amount also, because I'm raising value error on both side. Thank you for banking with us. If I decide that I don't have a try except block, for instance, and I'm just having an if statement, for instance, like this. So let me remove this, and I have this like this. It will just raise. We're using raise, and then when I run, please enter an amount 3,000, and it will have value error. Please enter an amount not exceeding 1,000. So you can do it in either way you want. Raise exception within the try block. Use the raise exception within an if statement without having to use the try except block. But for production, you always have to use error handling method for codes that might result in an error, so that the errors will be handled without having to halt the program or crash the program, or without bringing out this cryptic message that the user might not understand. So this is where we end this lesson. Thank you, and see you in the next lesson.